Welcome to Elizabeth's Stories. Today we follow Marilyn Stewart, a devoted mother excluded from her son's wedding who reclaims her dignity, confronts betrayal, and rediscovers her strength. Subscribe and hit the bell for weekly tales of truth and empowerment. Share your thoughts below. Let's start the story. The air in Wilmington was thick with the scent of jasmine and salt, a deceptive sweetness that clung to the evening like a whispered lie. I stood at the entrance to the Silverstone Grand, my fingers curled around a silver clutch, its cool metal grounding me against the tremor in my chest. The grand doors loomed before me, carved oak polished to a gleam, reflecting the chandelier light in fractured prisms. Beyond them, music swelled violins weaving through laughter, the clink of crystal glasses, the murmur of 100 voices celebrating a moment I'd built with my own hands. My son's wedding, name. The young woman at the guest list table barely glanced up her pen hovering over a clipboard. Her voice clipped and mechanical. Marilyn Stewart. I said, my tone steady despite the flutter in my stomach. I smoothed the navy dress I'd chosen 2 weeks ago, its pearl buttons catching the light. Not extravagant, but deliberate a dress that said, I belonged, that I was someone you didn't overlook. My hair was swept up, pinned with care, and around my neck hung the sapphire pendant James had given me on our 30th anniversary, a weight both comforting and heavy since his funeral 3 years ago. She ran her finger down the list, her brow furrowing slightly. Then she looked up, her smile thin and awkward, like she'd been caught in a mistake she didn't want to admit. I'm sorry there's no Marilyn Stewart here. The words hit like a slap, sharp and cold, but I didn't flinch. Not yet. There must be a mistake, I said, my voice calm, though my pulse quickened. I'm the groom's mother. Before she could respond, a laugh sliced through the air, sharp and familiar, cutting through the music like a blade. Oh, that's because she's not invited, Caitlin said, stepping forward, her shimmering gown catching the light like liquid silver. Her lips curved into a smile that didn't reach her eyes, bright, cold, and victorious. But thank you for dressing up Marilyn. Really, you look persistent. The word hung in the air, a barb wrapped in velvet. I froze, my gaze locked on her, then flickering to the woman with the clipboard who shifted uncomfortably, her eyes darting between us. The lobby seemed to shrink, the chatter fading into a dull hum, as if the world had narrowed to this single moment of betrayal. I was the groom's mother. I had paid for every note of that music, every petal in the centerpieces, every glass now raised in a toast to my son Lionel. And yet, here I stood, erased. Caitlin's smile widened a predator's grin as she tilted her head. I'm sure you understand, Marilyn. The hall's at capacity, and we couldn't have any surprises. Her voice dripped with false sweetness, each word a calculated cut. She glanced toward the ballroom doors, where the celebration pulsed vibrant and oblivious. Somewhere inside, Lionel was laughing, toasting, celebrating a future I'd funded but wasn't allowed to witness. I didn't move, not at first. My knees trembled not from age, but from the weight of humiliation pressing down heavy as the sapphire at my throat. The clipboard woman coughed softly, her discomfort palpable. Should I check again? She asked, her voice small. Caitlin leaned in, her perfume sharp and cloying. She's not expected, she said firmly, her eyes never leaving mine. Let's not make a scene. A scene. The word echoed in my mind, absurd and cruel. Did they think I'd scream, throw my clutch, or collapse into tears beneath the crystal chandeliers? That wasn't me. I'd spent a lifetime swallowing slights, smoothing over tensions, keeping the peace for the sake of others. But this was different. This wasn't a forgotten invitation or a missed call. This was deliberate, a public excision, and Caitlin knew it. She knew I had paid for every inch of this night, and she stood there radiant and untouchable, daring me to react. I nodded once my lips pressed into a thin line. I understand, I said, my voice steady, though my mouth had gone dry. I turned, my heels clicking softly against the marble floor, and walked past the valet, who offered a puzzled glance. The warm Wilmington air greeted me outside, heavy with the promise of a storm. The sun was sinking, casting golden light over rows of parked cars, sleek Range Rovers, polished Teslas, and my old Honda Civic, modest and unassuming, tucked between them like an afterthought. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I didn't turn back to demand answers. Instead, I walked to my car, my chest burning with something older than shame, something sharper. Grief, perhaps, but not the kind I'd felt at James's funeral. This was raw alive, a wound that pulsed with every step. I slid into the driver's seat, my hands resting on the wheel, the navy fabric of my dress smooth across my knees. The engine hummed to life, but I didn't drive yet. I sat there staring at the hotel's silhouette against the twilight, its windows glowing like eyes that saw everything but understood nothing. The anger came then, slow and methodical, curling through me like smoke. My name wasn't on the list. Oh, but my money was. Over $75,000 wired discreetly to the wedding agency listed as an anonymous sponsor at Caitlin's insistence. Her family, the Redgraves, had taken the credit, their names emblazoned on every invitation, every thank you note, every toast. I'd agreed because I thought it was a bridge, a way to keep Lionel in my life, to mend the distance that had grown between us since James's death. I'd told myself it wasn't about pride. It was about love. Love meant sacrifice, meant stepping back so others could shine. I'd believed that if I stayed quiet, stayed helpful, I'd still belong. But as I gripped the steering wheel, the truth settled in, cold and unyielding. I hadn't just been overlooked. I'd been erased. And it wasn't the first time. The realization hit like a key turning in a lock, opening a door to memories I'd buried. The missed calls from Lionel, the birthdays he'd forgotten, the dinners where I'd been too much for Caitlin's polished world. I was the mother who'd sewn patches on his jeans when we couldn't afford new ones, who'd stayed up nights balancing checkbooks to keep him in school, who'd written checks to save his failing business years ago. And now I was a logistical nuisance, a name not worth including. The hotel shrank in my rearview mirror as I pulled onto the road. The streets of Wilmington blurred past red brick shops, couples strolling under streetlights, the cafe with the yellow awning where James and I used to share coffee and dreams. Everything looked the same, but I was different. Something was waking inside me, something I hadn't felt in years. Not anger, not yet, but a quiet certainty, like the first ripple before a wave. I stopped at a red light, my eyes catching an envelope on the passenger seat. Inside was a card I had signed that morning. "For your new beginning with all my love, Mom." Tucked within it, a cashier's check for $10,000 honeymoon money, a soft landing for Lionel and Caitlin. I'd written it with care, imagining it as a private gift, no fuss, no credit. Now it looked like a relic of a woman who no longer existed. I'd prepared for an ending they'd already written me out of. The light turned green, but I didn't move right away. My fingers brushed the envelope, and a memory flickered unbidden, sharp. A conversation with Caitlin months ago over coffee in her pristine kitchen. Her smile had been warm. Then her voice smooth as she explained how my generous contribution would mean the world to Lionel, how he'd never accept it if he knew it came from me. "It's better this way," she'd said, her eyes bright with something I hadn't recognized then. Manipulation. She'd framed me as a barrier, not a blessing, and I'd believed her. I'd believed I was helping us heal. The car behind me honked, jolting me back. I drove on my thoughts, spinning like gears clicking into place. There was something else, too, a detail I'd overlooked buried in the flurry of wedding plans. A letter half forgotten tucked in a drawer at home. Not from Caitlin or Lionel, but from the wedding planner, Chloe, months ago. A cryptic note scribbled in haste. Confirm final guest list with C. Redgrave. Discrepancies noted. I hadn't thought much of it then, assuming it was a clerical error. But now, in the dim glow of the dashboard, it felt like a clue, a thread to something larger, something hidden. I pulled over near the florist shop where I'd ordered the centerpieces white lilies and blue hydrangeas. Caitlin's favorites, each arrangement a silent offering from me. The shop was closed, its windows dark, but the sight of it stirred something deeper. My phone buzzed the screen, lighting up with a notification from the bank app. A pending transaction, the final payment for the venue set to clear at 6 a.m. tomorrow. My fingers hovered over the screen steady now, no longer trembling. This wasn't just about a guest list. It was about power, who held it, who wielded it, who was left in the shadows. Caitlin thought she'd won her laugh, echoing in my mind like a taunt. But she didn't know me, not really. She didn't know the woman who'd survived loss, who'd rebuilt a life after James, who'd carried a family on her shoulders for decades. She didn't know the strength that comes from silence, the kind that builds slowly, waiting for its moment. I opened the car door and stepped out, the night air cool against my skin. The stars were faint, veiled by clouds, but they were there, watching. I looked back at the envelope, then at the hotel's distant glow. They hadn't put my name on the list, but they were about to learn what happens when you erase someone who holds the keys to everything. I got back in the car, my mind sharp, my purpose clear. This wasn't the end of the story. It was the beginning of mine. The streets of Wilmington slipped past my windshield, a blur of red brick facades and flickering streetlights. Each one a silent witness to the unraveling of something I'd spent years holding together. My Honda Civic hummed softly, a steady counterpoint to the storm brewing inside me. The night was warm, heavy with the threat of rain, and the sapphire pendant at my throat felt like an anchor tethering me to a past I couldn't escape and a present I was only beginning to understand. I wasn't driving home, not yet. I needed the road, the distance, the illusion of motion to make sense of the wound Caitlin's laugh had carved into me. I turned onto Riverton Drive, the familiar curve of my neighborhood, pulling me back like a tide. My house stood at the end of the street, a white bungalow with a sloped porch and a creaky step James never got around to fixing. It was a house built on promises, his mine, ours. And now it was just mine. A quiet sanctuary that held secrets I hadn't dared to face until tonight. I pulled into the driveway, cut the engine, and sat there, the silence pressing in. The envelope on the passenger seat stared back at me, its edges sharp in the dim glow of a street lamp. For your new beginning with all my love, Mom. The words felt like a mockery now, a relic of a woman who believed love could buy a seat at the table. I stepped out of the car, the air thick with the scent of damp grass and impending rain. My heels sank slightly into the soft earth as I walked to the porch, the navy dress clinging to my legs like a second skin. Inside, the house was dark, the kind of dark that feels like it's waiting for you to speak first. I didn't turn on the lights. Instead, I moved to the kitchen, my fingers brushing the drawer beside the sink. It was where I kept the practical things. Bills, receipts, the mundane evidence of a life lived for others. But tonight, I was looking for something else, something I'd buried, not out of shame, but out of habit. The drawer slid open with a soft creak revealing folders labeled in my careful handwriting. Utilities, taxes, Lionel, wedding. That last one stopped me, my breath catching as I pulled it out. The folder was heavier than I remembered, stuffed with papers that told a story I'd been too willing to ignore. I carried it to the kitchen table, the same table where I'd sewn patches onto Lionel's jeans when he was a boy, where I'd balanced checkbooks to keep us afloat after James's death, where I'd signed checks for a wedding that had just spat me out. I opened the folder, and the first document stared up at me, a contract with Pearl Weddings, the agency Caitlin had chosen for its elegance and discretion. The numbers were stark, $76 and $400 itemized down to the last cent. Venue rental, $25,000. Catering for 120 guests, 18 to 1,000. Floral arrangements, 8 to 500. White lilies and blue hydrangeas, Caitlin's favorites, each petal a silent offering from me. Photography music, gold foil invitations, every detail meticulously planned, every payment drawn from my savings, wired discreetly under anonymous sponsor at Caitlin's insistence. Her words echoed in my mind. "It's better this way, Marilyn. Let my family take the credit. Lionel will feel so proud." I'd nodded, then believing I was building a bridge to my son, mending the distance that had grown since he'd moved into Caitlin's world of polished surfaces and calculated smiles. But there was something else in the folder tucked beneath the contracts, a single sheet of paper folded once its edges slightly worn. The note from Chloe, the wedding planner, dated 3 months ago. Confirm final guest list with C. Redgrave. Discrepancies noted. The word discrepancies leapt out a splinter in my mind. I'd dismissed it at the time, assuming it was a typo or a clerical error. But now, in the quiet of my kitchen, it felt like a cipher, a clue to a puzzle I hadn't known I was solving. What discrepancies? Why had Chloe felt the need to write this note, and why had she addressed it to me only to let Caitlin take control? I set the note aside and flipped through the rest of the folder. Bank statements, email, threads, receipts, all bearing my name, my accounts, my sacrifices. Over $75,000 drained from the savings I had built over decades, the nest egg James and I had scraped together for a future we'd never share. I'd given it willingly, not for recognition, but for Lionel. For the boy who'd clung to my hip after preschool, who'd laughed when I pressed sun-warmed sheets to his cheek, who'd once looked at me like I was his whole world. That boy was gone, replaced by a man who called himself Lee now, who wore tailored suits and moved in circles that found me inconvenient. The anger that had sparked in the car was growing not wild or reckless, but focused like a flame held steady. I leaned back in the chair, the sapphire pendant catching the faint light from the window. It was James's last gift, given on a night when we'd danced in this very kitchen, his hands warm on my waist, his voice promising we'd grow old together. He hadn't known then that together would be cut short, that I'd be left to navigate a world where love was a currency too easily spent. I'd worn the pendant tonight to feel him with me, to carry a piece of that promise into the wedding. But instead, it had witnessed my humiliation. I closed my eyes, and the memories came unbidden, sharp as glass. Lionel at 5, red-faced and squirming in my arms, his father's dimples etched into his cheeks. Lionel at 12, outgrowing his jeans faster than I could replace them, my needle flashing under the lamplight as I patched them up. Lionel at 20, calling me from college, his voice bright, with dreams I'd helped fund with late-night shifts and skipped vacations. And then Lionel at 30, distant, his calls growing shorter, his visits rarer, his life shaped by Caitlin's vision of perfection, a vision that had no room for me. I opened my eyes, the folder still open before me. Another memory surfaced, one I'd pushed down for months. A phone call with Caitlin late last winter, her voice smooth as silk over the line. "Marilyn, we're so grateful for your help. But let's keep it between us. Lionel's sensitive about family dynamics, you know. He wants this to be our moment." I'd agreed not because I wanted to stay hidden, but because I thought it was what he needed. I'd convinced myself that love meant stepping back, letting them shine, even if it meant dimming my own light. But now, staring at the receipts, the contracts, the note with its cryptic warning, I saw it clearly. This wasn't about love. It was about control. Caitlin hadn't just excluded me from the guest list. She'd orchestrated a narrative where I didn't exist. And Lionel, the boy with my mother's nose and his father's laugh, had let her. He'd stood in that ballroom, raising a glass I'd paid for while his mother was turned away at the door. The realization was a blade cutting through years of self-deception. I'd been fading for years, not just tonight. The missed calls, the unreturned messages, the way Caitlin's family looked through me at holiday dinners, their smiles polite but empty. I'd told myself it was the price of motherhood, the quiet sacrifice of letting your child outshine you. But this wasn't sacrifice. It was erasure. And I'd funded it, every cent, every choice, every lie. I stood the chair scraping against the floor and walked to the window. The street outside was quiet, the neighbors' lights glowing softly through drawn curtains. My reflection stared back a woman in a navy dress, her hair still pinned, her eyes sharp with something new. Not anger, not yet, but clarity, the kind of clarity that comes when you stop pretending the world is kinder than it is. I returned to the table and picked up Chloe's note again. Discrepancies noted. The words felt heavier now, like a code I was meant to crack. I opened my laptop, the screen casting a blue glow across the kitchen. My fingers moved quickly, pulling up old emails from Pearl weddings. Most were standard confirmations, invoices, schedules, but one buried in a thread from 6 weeks ago caught my eye. It was from Chloe, sent at 2 a.m., an unusual time for a planner so meticulous. Mrs. Stewart, please advise on guest list finalization. C. Redgrave has submitted changes, but your approval is required as primary sponsor, awaiting your response. I hadn't responded. I hadn't even seen it. I'd been traveling that week visiting Eloise at her college art exhibit, and I'd trusted Caitlin to handle the details. She'd assured me it was under control, that I didn't need to worry about the little things. But this wasn't little. This was deliberate. Caitlin had made changes to the guest list, and I hadn't been consulted. The discrepancies weren't errors, they were choices. My heart pounded not with pain, but with purpose. I scrolled further, finding another email, this one from Caitlin to Chloe, forwarded to me by mistake. Please ensure all correspondence reflects the Redgrave family as sponsors. It's important for appearances. Marilyn understands. The words burned, each one a confirmation of the betrayal I had felt but hadn't named. Caitlin hadn't just excluded me. She'd rewritten the story of the wedding to erase my role entirely. And Lionel, my son, had either agreed or looked the other way. I closed the laptop, the screen going dark. The folder lay open, its contents spilling across the table like evidence in a trial. I picked up a receipt for the floral arrangements, my thumb tracing the line item for the lilies. Caitlin had chosen them, insisting they were non-negotiable, a symbol of her perfect day. I'd paid for them, driven to the florist myself to ensure they'd be fresh, imagining they'd be a bridge between us. But they weren't. They were props in a performance I wasn't invited to watch. The clock on the wall ticked softly, marking the hours until the final payment for the venue would clear. 6 a.m. tomorrow. I opened my phone, the bank app glowing under my touch. The pending transaction was there, a number that represented years of my life, my savings, my trust. I could stop it. I could pull the thread and watch their carefully curated world unravel. But it wasn't just about the money. It was about the truth. The truth they'd buried, the truth I'd let them bury. I stood again, moving to the living room, where a single lamp cast long shadows across the walls. My eyes fell on a framed photo on the mantel. Lionel at 10, grinning beside me at the county fair, his hand sticky with cotton candy, my arm around his shoulders. That boy had trusted me, needed me, loved me. But the man he'd become had traded that trust for something shinier, something that didn't include me. I touched the frame, my fingers lingering on the glass. Lionel. I whispered the name I'd given him, not the polished Lee he used now. What happened to you? The question hung in the air unanswered, but another question was forming one I hadn't dared to ask until now. What happened to me? When had I started believing I was disposable, that my love was a currency to be spent without acknowledgement? I'd spent years fading into the background, convincing myself it was noble, selfless. But there was nothing noble about being erased. I returned to the kitchen, my gaze falling on the envelope again. The check inside 10,000 for their honeymoon was a final gesture of a woman who thought she could buy her way back into her son's life. I slid it out the paper crisp under my fingers. It felt like a contract I'd signed with myself, a promise to keep giving even when I got nothing in return. I held it for a moment, then set it down beside Chloe's note. 2 pieces of paper, 2 truths, one I'd been too blind to see, and one I had been too willing to accept. The phone buzzed, a notification from the bank. A reminder of the pending transaction, a countdown to the moment I could change everything. I didn't open it yet. Instead, I walked to the back door and stepped onto the porch, the night air cool against my skin. The stars were hidden now, swallowed by clouds, but I could feel them waiting. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barked. A car horn sounded, life moving on without pause. But I wasn't moving yet. I was standing still, letting the truth settle into my bones. Caitlin's laugh echoed in my mind, not just from tonight, but from every moment she'd diminished me. Every polite smile, every subtle dismissal, every time she'd called me Marilyn, like it was a formality, not a name. And Lionel, my son, had let it happen. He'd stood by while his wife built a world that excluded me, a world I'd paid for. But there was something else, something I couldn't shake. The note, the email, the discrepancies, they weren't accidents. They were clues, pieces of a puzzle I was only beginning to see. Caitlin hadn't just acted on a whim. She'd planned this, and Lionel had either known or chosen not to know. I stepped back inside my heels, clicking against the hardwood floor. The folder was still open, the receipts and contracts glowing under the lamp like a map to a truth I'd been too afraid to face. I picked up Chloe's note again, my fingers tracing the words. Discrepancies noted. What else had been changed? Who else had been erased? And why had Chloe felt the need to warn me, however subtly? I sat down, my mind racing. The anger was still there, but it was no longer a wildfire. It was a blade sharp and precise, ready to cut through the lies I had let define me. I wasn't just a mother, a widow, a checkbook. I was Marilyn Stewart, and I was done being invisible. The clock ticked closer to midnight, each second a reminder that I had a choice to make, not just about the money, but about who I was going to be when the sun rose tomorrow. I opened my phone again, the bank app still glowing. My finger hovered over the screen, steady now, certain. They thought they could erase me, but they were about to learn that some names carry more weight than they ever imagined. And I was ready to make them feel it. The kitchen was a cocoon of shadows, the single lamp casting a pool of light over the table, where the Lionel wedding folder lay open like a confession. My fingers hovered over Chloe's note. Discrepancies noted its cryptic warning now, a pulse in my mind urging me to act. The clock on the wall read 11:47 p.m., each tick a countdown to the final venue payment set to clear at 6 a.m. My phone sat beside the folder, the bank app's glow a silent challenge. I could stop it. I could unravel their perfect night with a single tap. But this wasn't just about money. It was about truth, mine, theirs, and the space between where I'd been erased. I stood the navy dress still clinging to me, its pearl buttons catching the light like tiny moons. The sapphire pendant at my throat felt heavier now, not with grief, but with purpose. I moved to the sink, splashing cold water on my face, letting it shock me into clarity. Caitlin's laugh echoed in my memory, sharp and mocking, but it wasn't just her voice I heard. It was the silence of my son Lionel, who'd stood in that ballroom, letting his wife turn me away. And it was the silence of my own heart, too long content to fade for the sake of others. I returned to the table, my gaze falling on the envelope with the honeymoon check, 10,000, a final gesture of a woman who thought love could be bought with sacrifice. I slid it out the paper crisp and final. My signature stared back a promise I'd made to a son who no longer saw me. I held it for a moment, then set it down beside Chloe's note, and the misdirected email from Caitlin. Please. Ensure all correspondence reflects the Redgrave family as sponsors. It's important for appearances. Marilyn understands. The words burned not with pain, but with revelation. She thought I'd understand being erased. She thought I'd stay silent. I picked up my phone, the bank app still open. My finger hovered over the pending transaction, 25,000 for the Silverstone Grand's final payment. I could let it go through, let them dance on my dime while I sat in the dark. Or I could stop it, force them to face the void they'd created. The choice was mine, and for the first time in years, I felt the weight of my own power. Not the power of money, but the power of refusal, the power to say no. I dialed the bank, my voice steady as it connected. Wilmington First Savings. "This is Nora," came, the cheerful response tinged with late-night fatigue. "Hello, Nora. This is Marilyn Stewart. I need to speak to my personal accounts manager, please." A pause, then the sound of typing. "Yes, Mrs. Stewart. One moment while I connect you." The line clicked, and Richard's voice came through brisk, but warm. "Mrs. Stewart, it's good to hear from you. What can I do for you this evening?" I took a breath, my eyes on the folder. "I need you to halt all pending transactions related to the Stewart-Robinson wedding, effective immediately." A longer pause, more typing. "Ma'am, that includes several payments scheduled within the next 12 hours. Catering, hotel, entertainment. Is there a particular concern?" "Yes," I said, my voice calm but unyielding. "The concern is that the people hosting that wedding made sure I wasn't invited." Silence. Then slowly, "I'm very sorry to hear that. But technically, these were authorized payments. Some may already be in process." Then stop whatever hasn't cleared and flag anything else. I'll accept any penalty fees. I understand. Give me a moment to check the transaction queue." His voice was cautious professional, but I could hear the curiosity beneath it. I waited, my gaze drifting to the wilting lilies in the crystal vase on the counter. Caitlin's choice, another piece of her vision I'd funded. The petals were browning at the edges, curling inward as if ashamed of their own decay. Richard returned. "We can halt the final venue payment, the balance for the band, and the late catering costs. The photographer's deposit has cleared, as has the decoration team's base fee. Everything else can be stopped." "Do it," I said, my voice a blade. "Yes, ma'am. I'll follow up with confirmation emails. Would you like us to notify the vendors?" "No," I replied. "I'll handle it." I hung up the silence in the kitchen now, alive with possibility. The act was done, but it wasn't enough. Stopping the payments was a start, but I needed to make them feel the weight of their choices. I dialed Pearl Weddings, my fingers steady despite the hour. The line rang twice before a flustered voice answered, "Ultert." Pearl Weddings. This is Chloe. Hello, Chloe. This is Marilyn Stewart. A beat of silence, then a sharp intake of breath. Oh, Mrs. Stewart, is everything all right? No, I said, my tone even. But I'm going to make it all right. I need to cancel all pending services for the Robinson Stewart wedding effective immediately. But that's tomorrow. Her voice rose, panic creeping in. The hotel, the staff, the catering. It's hundreds of people. Are you sure they're not my concern anymore? I said. None of them are. I ended the call before she could protest further, the finality of it settling over me like a cloak. I turned back to the table, picking up the honeymoon check. It felt like a relic, a promise I had made to a version of myself that no longer existed. I held it between my fingers, then tore it slowly, deliberately, the sound sharp in the quiet kitchen. The pieces fell like confetti, scattering across the table among the receipts and contracts. I didn't smile, didn't gloat. This wasn't revenge. It was reclamation. I stood and walked to the back porch, needing air, needing space. The night was heavy now, the clouds thicker, the stars completely hidden. The breeze carried the faint hum of the city cars, distant laughter, the pulse of a world that didn't pause for my pain. I leaned against the railing, the sapphire pendant cool against my skin. My mind drifted to the note from Chloe, the email from Caitlin, the pieces of a puzzle I was only beginning to assemble. There was something more here, something I hadn't fully grasped. Why had Chloe sent that note? Why had Caitlin been so deliberate in erasing me? And what else had been changed in the guest list? I went back inside my steps, purposeful now. The laptop was still open, and I pulled up the email thread again, scrolling through the messages with a new focus. There it was, buried in a chain from 2 months ago. Another email from Chloe, this one marked urgent. Mrs. Stewart, please confirm the revised guest list. C. Redgrave has removed several names, citing capacity concerns. Your approval is required as primary sponsor. I hadn't seen it, hadn't responded. I'd been distracted trusting Caitlin to handle the details, but now the word several stood out. Who else had been cut? Friends, family, others who didn't fit Caitlin's vision of perfection. I opened a new tab, my fingers moving faster now, and logged into the wedding agency's portal. The guest list was there, a digital spreadsheet pristine and organized. I scanned the names, Redgrave's their business associates, Lionel's colleagues, Caitlin's friends. But there were absences names I had expected to see. Eloise's art professor who'd mentored her through college. Lionel's old high school coach who'd written him a recommendation for his first job. My cousin Helen, who'd sent a card every Christmas despite living across the country. All gone, replaced by names I didn't recognize. Clients. Investors. People who screamed status. Caitlin hadn't just erased me. She'd curated a guest list that erased anyone who didn't serve her narrative. The realization hit like a spark in dry grass. This wasn't a mistake. It was a purge. Caitlin had sculpted the wedding into a performance, a showcase of her family's wealth and influence, and I was just one of many casualties. But I was the one who'd paid for it, the one whose name was on every contract, every wire transfer. And that gave me power they hadn't anticipated. I closed the laptop, my mind racing. The bank had stopped the payments the agency had been notified, but I wasn't done. I needed to know more. I needed to understand the full scope of Caitlin's plan. I opened the folder again, pulling out a printed email from the florist, a small detail I'd overlooked before. Per Ms. Redgrave's request, we've adjusted the centerpiece count to accommodate a smaller guest list. Please confirm, smaller guest list. Another clue, another thread. How many people had she cut? and why I stood pacing the kitchen, the pieces clicking together. Caitlin hadn't just wanted me out of the spotlight, she'd wanted me out of the story entirely. But why go to such lengths? Was it pride control, or something deeper? Something I hadn't yet uncovered? I thought of Lionel standing in that ballroom, unaware or unwilling to see what his wife had done. Had he known about the guest list? Had he agreed to it? The thought twisted in my chest, but I pushed it aside. I couldn't afford to dwell on pain now. I needed to act. I picked up the phone again, dialing a number I hadn't used in years. Helen, my cousin, the one who'd always seen through Caitlin's polished facade. The line rang twice before she answered, her voice warm but cautious. "Marilyn, it's late. Everything okay?" "No," I said, my voice steady. "But I need your help. Did you get an invitation to Lionel's wedding?" A pause, then a soft laugh. "No, I didn't. I figured it was an oversight. Caitlin's been particular about these things." "It wasn't an oversight," I said. "She cut you from the guest list. And me. And others. I need to know if you've heard anything about why." Helen's tone shifted sharper now. "I haven't heard much, but I did get a strange call from Eloise a few weeks ago. She asked if I was coming, said she'd assumed I'd be there. When I told her I wasn't invited, she seemed confused, said something about Caitlin handling the list herself. Eloise, my granddaughter, the one light in this fractured family, she hadn't known." The thought brought a flicker of warmth, but it was quickly overshadowed by the growing puzzle. Did she say anything else, I asked? Just that Caitlin's been stressed about appearances, something about her father's business partners being a big part of the event. I didn't think much of it at the time, but— "Marilyn, what's going on? I'm figuring that out," I said. "But I've just canceled the payments for the wedding. All of them." Helen let out a low whistle. "You're playing with fire, cousin. But I can't say I blame you. If you need me to dig, I've still got contacts in Wilmington. Old friends, people who know the Redgraves." "Do it," I said, quietly. "I want to know what Caitlin's hiding." We hung up, and I felt the shift inside me, a tide turning. This wasn't just about reclaiming my dignity. It was about uncovering the truth. I returned to the table, picking up the torn pieces of the check. They felt lighter now, like shedding a skin I'd outgrown. I swept them into the trash, then sat down, my mind clear, my purpose sharp. The wedding was hours away, but it was already unraveling. The musicians would pack up, the caterers would walk out, the guests would whisper, and Caitlin, with her perfect gown and her perfect smile, would have to face a stage that was crumbling beneath her. I opened my laptop again, drafting an email to Chloe, confirming cancellation of all services for the Robinson-Stewart wedding. No further payments will be made. Please inform the couple. I hit send, the sound of the keystroke echoing in the quiet kitchen. Then I stood, walking to the porch once more. The air was cooler now, the storm closer, the first drops of rain tapping against the roof. I leaned against the railing, the sapphire pendant catching the faint light from the street lamp. It wasn't just a gift from James anymore. It was a reminder of who I'd been, who I was becoming. The phone buzzed again, a text from Eloise. "Grandma, are you okay? I just heard from a friend at the hotel. They're saying the payments didn't go through." I stared at the message, my heart swelling at the thought of her, the one person who'd never made me feel invisible. I typed a reply. "I'm fine, sweetheart. I'll explain soon. Stay safe." I hit send, then turned off the phone. I didn't need to hear the chaos yet. I'd feel it soon enough. The rain began to fall harder, a steady rhythm against the porch. I closed my eyes, letting it wash over me, a baptism of sorts. They'd wanted me invisible, but invisibility was a weapon they hadn't anticipated. I'd funded their stage, their lights, their music, and now I was taking it all back. Not out of spite, but out of truth. They'd learn what it meant to stand in the dark just as I had, and I'd be waiting not for their apologies, but for the moment they realized who I'd always been. The clock struck midnight, the sound faint but resolute. The storm was here, and so was I. The rain had stopped by morning, leaving Wilmington draped in a quiet mist, the kind that softens edges but sharpens truths. I stood at my kitchen window, a mug of coffee warming my hands, the steam curling upward like a question I wasn't ready to answer. The Lionel wedding folder still lay on the table, its contents scattered like evidence from a crime scene I'd uncovered but hadn't fully solved. The clock read 7:12 a.m., and the world beyond my bungalow was waking oblivious to the chaos I had set in motion. The final venue payment hadn't cleared. The caterers, the band, the florists, all of it had unraveled with a single call, a single choice. My choice. I hadn't slept, not really. My mind had been too alive replaying Caitlin's laugh, Chloe's cryptic note, the email that revealed a guest list purged of anyone who didn't fit her vision. Discrepancies noted, the words lingered, a puzzle piece I couldn't place. Who else had been cut? What was Caitlin hiding? And Lionel, my Lionel, had he known, or had he simply let himself be swept along in her current? The questions churned, but they didn't weaken me. They fueled me. The first sign of the outside world catching up came at 7:30. Not with a call, but a knock. Sharp, urgent, it jolted me from my thoughts. I set the mug down, smoothed my sweater casual, now the navy dress folded away like a relic, and walked to the door. Through the peephole, I saw Eloise, my granddaughter, her hair still pinned from last night's rehearsal dinner, her eyes wide with a mix of panic and awe. She clutched a canvas bag, her knuckles white, her face flushed as if she'd run here. I opened the door and she stepped inside without a word, dropping her bag by the coat rack. "Grandma," she whispered, her voice trembling, but not with fear. Something closer to disbelief. "What did you do?" I gestured to the couch. "Come in, sweetheart. Sit." She sank onto the cushions, her hands twisting in her lap, her eyes searching mine. "The venue's in chaos. The hotel manager called everyone this morning. There's no banquet, no music, no catering. Dad's losing his mind. Caitlin's crying. Her parents are threatening to sue the agency. They're saying it's a clerical error, but—" She trailed off, her gaze dropping to the floor. "I heard someone say it was you, that you pulled the plug." I sat across from her, my hands folded, my voice steady. "They're not wrong." Her head snapped up, her eyes wide. "You canceled everything." Why I looked at her really looked seeing the girl who'd always seen me through birthdays, through James's funeral, through the quiet years when Lionel's calls grew scarce. Eloise deserved the truth. "They didn't want me there," I said, my voice soft but unyielding. "Your father and Caitlin made that very clear. They wanted my money, not my presence." Her face flushed, a mix of anger and grief. "That's disgusting." Her voice broke, and she blinked rapidly, tears threatening to spill. "I didn't know, Grandma. I swear I didn't. I thought you were coming." "I assumed I know," I interrupted gently. "I assumed, too. But they made a choice, and now they're living with it." She shook her head, her hands clenching into fists. "Dad's trying to spin it, saying it's a mix-up. Caitlin's blaming the agency, but people are asking questions. Someone, I think it was the florist, mentioned your name. They said you were the one who paid for everything." I raised an eyebrow. "Did they—" She nodded, her voice dropping to a whisper. "It's starting to spread. Caitlin's parents are furious. They thought they were the ones funding it. Her dad was shouting at Dad, calling him a fraud, saying he's embarrassed them in front of their investors." A flicker of satisfaction stirred in my chest, not cruel, but honest. "Good," I said. "Let them feel the weight of their lies." Eloise stared at me. her expression shifting from shock to something like admiration. "You're not sorry, are you?" "No," I said, meeting her gaze. "Not for a second." She exhaled a shaky breath and leaned back, her shoulders sagging as if she'd been carrying the chaos herself. "What happens now?" "There's a whole wedding tonight. People are flying in. The photographer's there, the band's packing up. What are they going to do?" I stood, moving to the window, the mist outside swirling like a veil. "They'll do what adults do when their plans fall apart. They'll figure it out." "And you?" she asked, her voice small. "What are you going to do?" I turned, offering her a thin smile. "I'm going to make sure they never forget my name." Her eyes widened, but she didn't press. Instead, she curled into the corner of the couch, pulling her knees up like she used to when she was little, playing tea party on this very floor. We sat in silence for a moment, the kind that doesn't need filling, the kind that holds truth instead of hiding it. Outside, a cardinal landed on the fence, its red feathers stark against the gray morning. I thought of James, how he'd loved their brazen color, how he'd said they were proof the world still had fight in it. "Does Dad know?" Eloise asked. Finally, her voice barely above a whisper. "That you canceled everything I expect he does by now, and that you paid for it all." I tilted my head. "I imagine that's just starting to dawn on him." She rubbed her eyes, a small bitter laugh escaping her. "I wish I could see their faces when they figure it out." "No need," I said, my voice calm. "You'll feel the fallout soon enough." She looked at me, her expression softening. "Are you okay, Grandma?" I paused, considering the question. "I'm tired," I said honestly. "But I'm not broken." She stood crossing the room to kneel at my feet, her hands reaching for mine. "I love you," she said simply, her voice steady now, no longer trembling. I squeezed her hands, the warmth of her touch, grounding me. "I know. And I love you. That's why I did this." We stayed like that for a while, old and young, linked by something stronger than blood truth. Eloise left soon after, promising to call later, her canvas bag slung over her shoulder, her steps lighter than when she'd arrived. I watched her go, the mist swallowing her silhouette, and felt a quiet strength settle in my bones. The storm I had unleashed wasn't just for me. It was for her, too, for the girl who'd always seen me, who deserved to know what it meant to stand tall. The phone buzzed at 8:15, a call from an unknown number. I let it ring, the sound sharp against the stillness of the house. A voicemail followed, and I played it, keeping the speaker low. It was Chloe, her voice high and frantic. "Mrs. Stewart, the hotel's threatening to cancel the ballroom. The caterers are demanding payment up front. We have 120 guests arriving tonight, and no one knows what's happening. Please call me back." I deleted the message without saving it. Chloe wasn't the villain here, but she wasn't my responsibility either. She'd sent me warnings, discrepancies noted, but she'd let Caitlin's changes slide, assuming I'd approve or overlook them. That was her mistake. I wasn't overlooking anything anymore. By 9:00, the texts started. Eloise, first, Grandma. They're trying to rebook a restaurant. It's a mess. Caitlin's dad is on the phone with a lawyer. Then, minutes later, waiters walked out. The cake never arrived. Guests are leaving. I didn't reply. Not yet. The chaos was unfolding exactly as I'd expected. But there was something else nagging at me, a thread I hadn't pulled. The guest list. The several names Caitlin had removed. I opened my laptop, pulling up the wedding agency's portal again. The spreadsheet was still there, a sterile grid of names and statuses. I scanned it, my eyes catching on another absence I hadn't noticed before. Sarah Lionel's childhood friend, the one who'd stood by him through his first divorce, who'd sent me a card after James's death. Gone. I leaned back, my mind racing. This wasn't just about me. Caitlin had curated a guest list that erased anyone tied to Lionel's past, anyone who might remind her of where he came from. It was a calculated move. But why? Was it pride? Or something more? I thought of Helen's call last night. Her promise to dig into the Redgraves. I needed answers, and I needed them fast. The doorbell rang at 10:30, a heavy, insistent knock. I knew who it was before I reached the door. Through the peephole, I saw Lionel, his suit jacket gone, his shirt wrinkled, his jaw tight, with something that wasn't quite anger control, maybe, or desperation. I opened the door but didn't step aside. "Mom," he said, his voice tight, his eyes avoiding mine. "We need to talk." "So talk," I said, one hand resting on the doorframe, blocking his entry. He blinked, caught off guard. "Can I come in?" "No." The word landed like a stone, and for a moment he looked like the boy who'd forgotten his lines in the nativity play searching for a cue. But he wasn't that boy anymore. He was a man who'd let his wife turn me away. He glanced behind him as if expecting an audience, then leaned closer. Caitlin's in a panic. The venue's threatening legal action. The caterers canceled. Guests are arriving, and we've got nothing. What the hell is going on? I canceled the payments. I said, my voice even. He flinched, his jaw working. I know that. Why? Because I wasn't invited. He exhaled sharply, rubbing his temples. Jesus, Mom, is this really about that? You said you didn't want attention? We thought you thought wrong, I cut in. You let your wife laugh in my face and tell the staff I wasn't on the guest list. You stood there and said nothing. That's not how it was supposed to go. He set his voice, weaker now, less certain. It was a misunderstanding. No, Lionel. It was a choice. And you made it. He looked away, his hands on his hips, then dropping to his sides. Caitlin thought it would be cleaner if... Don't, I said, my voice sharp. Don't blame her. You let me stand there like a fool. You let her erase me. And yet somehow my money was welcome. He flinched again, and for a moment I thought I saw shame flicker in his eyes. But it was gone as quickly as it came. You're twisting this, he said, but the words lacked conviction. You insisted on staying anonymous. We thought you wanted it that way. I wanted to be there, I said, my voice low-cutting. I wanted to see my son get married. I paid for every light, every flower, every note of music in that room. And you let her shut the door in my face. He didn't answer, his jaw tight, his eyes fixed on the porch floor. The silence stretched heavy with truths neither of us wanted to name. Finally, he spoke, his voice low. You've tanked my wedding, Caitlin's reputation, my job, our partners, everyone's here tonight. You're embarrassing me. I leaned against the doorframe, my gaze steady. You managed that on your own. He looked up, his eyes flashing with something like desperation. So what now? You're done with us, after everything. What is everything, Lionel? I asked, my voice calm but piercing. A decade of distance, 1,000 small slights. You stopped being my son the day you decided I was an obstacle. His expression cracked just for a moment, and I saw the boy I had raised, the one who'd run to me with scraped knees, who'd trusted me to fix everything. But that boy was gone. Mom. He said, his voice softer now, pleading. Please. What do I tell them? Tell them the truth, I said. And I closed the door. The click of the latch was final, a sound that echoed in the stillness of the house. I stood there, my hand on the knob, listening. He didn't knock again. He didn't call out. Through the window, I saw him walk down the path. His shoulders hunched, his steps uneven. My Lionel, not the son I'd raised, but the man who'd grown out of needing me, who'd learned to resent me instead. I returned to the kitchen, the coffee cold, now the folder still open. The phone buzzed again, Caitlin's name flashing on the screen. I let it ring, her voice spilling into another voicemail. I played it, keeping the volume low. Marilyn. She said, her tone strained, polished, but fraying at the edges. I think there's been a misunderstanding. I'm sorry if you felt unwelcome yesterday. That wasn't our intention. I almost laughed. Felt unwelcome. As if her laugh, her words, her deliberate exclusion were a matter of perception. I kept listening. The list was coordinated through the planner. There may have been a mix-up, but we're in a delicate situation now. Guests are arriving, the venue's in chaos, the caterers won't come without payment. We don't have that kind of liquidity. Please, let's fix this together. I deleted the message, my fingers steady. She thought she could smooth this over with apologies and excuses, but I was done being smoothed. I opened the wedding agency's portal again, my eyes scanning the guest list. Another name caught my attention. Margaret, the librarian who'd tutored Lionel through high school, who'd sent him books when he was struggling, gone. The pattern was clear now. Caitlin had erased anyone who tied Lionel to his roots, to me, to the life he'd had before her. The phone buzzed again, a text from Helen. Talked to a friend who knows the Redgraves. Caitlin's dad is in deep with some investors. The wedding was a show for them, a way to seal a deal. You were cut because you didn't fit the image. Call me. I stared at the message, the pieces clicking into place. The wedding wasn't just a celebration. It was a transaction, a performance to impress her father's business partners. And I, with my modest Honda and my unpolished past, was a liability. The discrepancies weren't random. They were strategic. Caitlin had curated a guest list to project wealth power control. But she hadn't counted on me pulling the plug. I called Helen back, my voice calm. What else did your friend say? She said Caitlin's been under pressure from her dad for months. The Redgraves' business is shaky, some bad investments, whispers of debt. The wedding was supposed to be a big display proof. They're still players. Your money made it possible, but they couldn't risk you showing up and, well, being you. Being me. I repeated the words, bitter but clarifying. What else? There's a rumor Caitlin's dad promised a board seat to one of the investors. The wedding was part of the deal, show them a perfect family, a perfect alliance. Lionel's just collateral. I closed my eyes, the weight of it settling in. Lionel hadn't just let me be erased. He'd been erased, too molded into a role that served Caitlin's family. Thank you, Helen, I said. Keep digging. Will do, she said. You okay? Better than I've been in years, I said, and I meant it. I hung up the kitchen quiet again, the mist outside thinning as the sun broke through. The chaos at the Silverstone Grand was growing, but I felt no guilt. They'd built their house on my foundation, then locked me out. Now they'd learn what happens when the foundation walks away. By noon, another knock came softer this time. I opened the door to find Connor, a young man from Pearl Weddings, his tie crooked, his face flushed with nerves. He held a thick folder, his hands trembling slightly. "Mrs. Stewart," he said, his voice stumbling. "Chloe asked me to deliver this. It's your contract and the original receipts. She wanted to apologize. She said she had no idea about the guest list situation." I studied him, his youth, a stark contrast to the weight of the moment. "I'm not angry at your agency, Connor," I said. "I'm angry at my son." Relief flickered across his face. "Thank you, ma'am. Chloe really didn't know. She thought you were some great aunt or something." I allowed a dry laugh. "That's generous." He handed me the folder, hesitating. "The venue's still holding the room technically until midnight, but with no payment, they can't serve or staff it. They're talking about legal action, but Chloe said if you confirm the cancellation directly, it might help. I glanced at the clock, 12:03 p.m. The first dance was supposed to start in 7 hours. I'll make the call, I said. He nodded, then paused at the edge of the porch. Mrs. Stewart, I've worked a lot of weddings. Some are showy, some are sweet. But Caitlin, I knew she was trouble the moment I saw her. I hope you're okay. I smiled small but real. I am. He left, and I opened the folder. The pages a mirror of the one on my table receipts, contracts, emails, all bearing my name. But there was something new tucked between the pages, a handwritten note from Chloe. Mrs. Stewart. I should have pushed harder about the guest list. Caitlin insisted it was finalized. I didn't know you were the sponsor until yesterday. I'm sorry. Another clue, another apology too late to matter. I dialed the Silverstone Grand, the line connecting to a brisk, annoyed voice. This is Marianne, event supervisor. Who am I speaking with, Marilyn Stewart? I said. The original sponsor of the Robinson-Stewart wedding. Her tone shifted, softening. Oh, Mrs. Stewart. We've been trying to reach you. The celebration's in disarray. Guests are arriving, but we've got no direction. There is no celebration, I said. Not under my name. Consider the reservation null. A pause, then quieter. Understood. May I ask, is everything all right? No, I said. But it will be. I hung up the finality of it settling over me. The ballroom would sit dark tonight, the guests holding warm champagne, whispering questions no one could answer. And somewhere in that chaos, Lionel and Caitlin would face the truth they'd tried to bury. By 4:00 p.m., Eloise texted again. Grandma, the Redgraves just found out they didn't pay for anything. Caitlin's dad is screaming at Dad. People are leaving. Some know it was you. I didn't reply. Let them know. Let them feel the draft of a house built on lies. Let them scramble. Let them explain. Let them sit in the silence I'd lived in for years. I poured fresh tea and sat on the back porch, the air warm, now the mist gone. The birds pecked at the feeder James had hung their movements quick and certain. My knees ached, but my spine was straight, my hands steady. For the first time in years, I felt like myself, not a mother, not a widow, but Marilyn Stewart, a woman who'd stopped apologizing for existing. The sun was high over Wilmington by noon, its light filtering through the lace curtains in my living room, casting delicate shadows across the hardwood floor. The Lionel wedding folder was closed now, tucked into a drawer, like a book I'd finished reading. Its secrets, Chloe's cryptic note, Caitlin's email, the purged guest list had been laid bare, and with them, the truth about my place in my son's life. The house was quiet, save for the soft hum of the refrigerator and the distant chirp of cardinals in the backyard. For the first time in years, the silence didn't feel empty. It felt like space to breathe, to think, to become. I stood at the kitchen counter slicing apples for a pie, the knife moving with a rhythm that steadied my hands. The act was simple grounding a ritual I'd learned from my mother and carried through decades of love and loss. The apples were tart, their scent sharp and clean, a reminder of seasons that turned regardless of human betrayals. I'd spent the morning tending to my garden, my fingers in the cool earth planting tulip bulbs for spring. Each bulb was a promise not to anyone else but to myself, a promise that I'd be here to see them bloom. The chaos at the Silverstone Grand had unfolded as I'd expected. By mid-morning, Eloise had texted again. No wedding. Guests left. Caitlin's dad is blaming everyone. Dad's not talking. I hadn't replied, not because I didn't care, but because I was done carrying their weight. The wedding was theirs to salvage or not. I'd given them a stage and they'd chosen to lock me out. Now I was choosing myself. I rolled out the pie dough, the rolling pins smooth under my palms, and thought of James. He'd loved my apple pie, always sneaking a slice before it cooled his laughter, filling this kitchen like sunlight. The sapphire pendant at my throat caught the light, a quiet reminder of him, of us, of the woman I'd been before I let myself fade. I hadn't worn it since the night at the hotel, but today I'd put it on again, not as a weight, but as a talisman. It wasn't just James's gift anymore. It was mine. The doorbell rang at 1:00 p.m., soft but deliberate. I wiped my hands on a dish towel and walked to the door expecting Eloise or perhaps Helen with more news about the Redgraves. Instead, I found a small package on the porch, wrapped in plain brown paper. No return address. My name was written in careful script, Marilyn Stewart, and beneath it a single word, sorry. I glanced down the street, but it was empty. The mist from the morning long gone, replaced by a clear, warm afternoon. I brought the package inside, setting it on the kitchen table. My fingers hesitated, tracing the edges of the paper. The handwriting wasn't Lionel's or Caitlin's. It was too precise, too unfamiliar. I opened it carefully, revealing a small wooden box, intricately carved with a pattern of vines. Inside was a letter folded tightly and a single pressed lily, its petals preserved but fragile. My breath caught. Lilies. Caitlin's choice for the wedding, the ones I'd paid for now, a ghostly echo of a night that never happened. I unfolded the letter, my heart steady but curious. It was from Chloe, the wedding planner, her handwriting matching the package. Mrs. Stewart, I failed you. I knew something was off with the guest list, but I didn't push hard enough. Caitlin insisted you'd approved the changes, but I should have checked. This lily was meant for the centerpieces. I kept one when we packed up. I hope it brings you peace. You deserved better. I set the letter down, the lily cradled in my palm. Chloe's apology was sincere, but it wasn't what I needed. I didn't need apologies anymore. I needed to understand why Caitlin had gone to such lengths, why Lionel had let her, why my name had been erased. The answer lay in the threads I'd been pulling, the clues Helen had uncovered. Caitlin's father, Richard Redgrave, had orchestrated the wedding as a business deal, a spectacle to impress investors and secure a board seat. I was a liability, a reminder of Lionel's modest roots, a contrast to the polished image they needed to project. But there was more, something Helen's friend had hinted at: debt desperation, a family on the brink. I placed the lily on the table, its fragility a mirror of the life I'd once lived, beautiful but easily crushed. I wasn't that woman anymore. I turned back to the pie, sliding it into the oven, the scent of cinnamon and apples soon filling the kitchen. The act felt like a reclaiming, a small defiance against a world that had tried to make me small. By 2:30, Eloise arrived, her hair loose, now her eyes bright, with a mix of exhaustion and resolve. She carried a sketchbook, her fingers smudged with charcoal, a sign she'd been drawing again. "Grandma," she said, stepping inside, "you should see the hotel. It's like a ghost town. The staff are packing up. The guests are gone. Caitlin's dad is still yelling, but no one's listening." I gestured to the couch, pouring her a glass of iced tea. "Let them yell," I said. "They built this mess." She took the glass, her fingers brushing mine. I talked to Dad. He's different, quiet. He didn't defend Caitlin this time. I raised an eyebrow, sitting across from her. What did he say? Not much, she admitted, her voice soft. He asked about you, said he didn't know you'd paid for everything. I think he's starting to see it, how Caitlin played him. I nodded, the words settling but not softening. Lionel's ignorance wasn't an excuse. It was a choice, one he'd made over years of letting me fade. He'll have to live with that, I said. Eloise leaned forward, her sketchbook open on her lap. I drew something for you, she said, flipping to a page. It was a charcoal sketch of me standing on the porch, the sapphire pendant glowing at my throat, my eyes sharp and alive. Behind me, the garden bloomed, tulips and lilies intertwined a riot of color against the gray mist. This is how I see you, she said, not what they tried to make you. My throat tightened, not with pain, but with gratitude. I reached for her hand, squeezing it gently. Thank you, sweetheart. This is everything. We sat for a while, talking about her art, her dreams, the life she was building at college. She didn't ask about Lionel or Caitlin, and I didn't bring them up. This moment was ours, a space carved out of the wreckage, a reminder that family wasn't just blood. It was who showed up, who saw you. By evening, the pie was cooling on the counter, its golden crust a small triumph. I'd invited Eloise to stay for dinner, and we ate together on the porch, the air warm and fragrant with honeysuckle. The conversation turned to James, to the summers we'd spent at the lake, to the way he'd taught Eloise to skip stones. The memories weren't heavy anymore. They were light, like the breeze carrying me forward instead of pulling me back. The next day brought another surprise. A letter slipped under my door sometime in the night. It was from Lionel, his handwriting unsteady, the paper creased as if he'd gripped it too tightly. Mom, I didn't know. Caitlin handled the guest list, and I trusted her. I should have checked. I should have fought for you. I'm sorry. I don't know how to fix this, but I want to try. There was no mention of the wedding, no excuses about the chaos, just those raw, halting words. I read it twice, then set it aside. The apology was real, but it wasn't enough, not yet. Trust once broken doesn't mend with words alone. I didn't hate Lionel, didn't wish him pain, but I wasn't ready to absolve him. I was done carrying the weight of his choices. I folded the letter and placed it in the drawer with the wedding folder, a chapter closed, but not forgotten. Caitlin's letter arrived 2 days later, delivered by courier, its envelope embossed with the red grave crest. Her words were polished, careful, a lawyer's hand behind them. Dear Marilyn, I deeply regret the misunderstanding at the wedding. Your generosity was never in question, and I take full responsibility for any oversight. We hope to make this right. Attached was a check, $5,000, a token, an insult. I didn't tear it up. I sent it back unopened with a single word written across the envelope, no. The act was small but seismic. I wasn't for sale. Not anymore. The days that followed were quiet but full. I painted the porch swing, its white paint chipped from years of neglect. I joined a community art class, my hands trembling at first as I picked up a brush, then steadying as I sketched the cardinals in my yard. I walked to the cafe with the yellow awning, the one James and I used to haunt, and ordered coffee for myself, savoring the bitterness, the warmth, the solitude that felt like strength. Helen called on the fourth day, her voice bright with news. I got more from my friend, she said. The Redgraves are in deeper than we thought. Richard's company is bleeding money. The wedding was a last-ditch effort to lock in investors, but your cancellation blew it up. They're scrambling to save face. And Caitlin? I asked, my voice neutral. She's playing the victim, but it's not working. People are talking about you, about how you funded everything. The investors are pulling back. Richard's furious, but he's got no leverage. You exposed them. I nodded, though she couldn't see me. And Lionel. He's staying out of it mostly. My friend says he's been at the office working late, avoiding Caitlin's family. Sounds like he's waking up. I thanked her and hung up the information, settling like dust after a storm. The Redgraves' collapse wasn't my goal, but it was a consequence of their choices. I felt no guilt, only clarity. I'd spent years propping up others, believing it was love. Now I was propping up myself. Eloise visited again that weekend, bringing her paints and a canvas. We worked side by side in the garden, the tulip bulbs now buried waiting for spring. She painted the sky bold strokes of blue and gold while I sketched the fence, the cardinals, the small, stubborn life I was rebuilding. "I'm proud of you," she said, her voice quiet but sure. "You didn't let them win. They didn't lose," I said, my brush pausing. "They just learned they don't get to write my story." She smiled, her eyes bright with understanding. "Can I stay here next summer?" Between semesters, I looked at her, my heart full, always. The weeks that followed were a tapestry of small moments. I joined a book club at the library where Margaret Lionel's old tutor welcomed me with a hug. No questions asked about the wedding. I baked pies for the neighbors, their gratitude simple and unguarded. I wrote in a journal, not about the past, but about the present, the way the sunlight hit the porch, the feel of paint on my fingers, the sound of Eloise's laughter. Each entry was a step not away from pain, but toward less. Lionel called once late at night, his voice hesitant. "Mom, can we talk? In person?" I paused, the phone heavy in my hand. "Not yet," I said. "But someday." He didn't push, and I didn't explain. I wasn't ready to rebuild what he'd broken, but I wasn't closing the door forever. Love, real love, doesn't demand erasure. It demands time. Caitlin sent no more letters, no more checks. The Redgraves' name faded from the local gossip, their empire crumbling under the weight of their own hubris. I didn't follow the details. I didn't need to. My world was here in the garden, in the paintbrush, in the moments I shared with Eloise. One evening, as the sun dipped low, I walked to the lake where James and I used to sit. The water was calm, reflecting the sky in shades of pink and gold. I carried the pressed lily from Chloe's package, its petals still intact, a relic of a night that had tried to break me but hadn't. I knelt at the water's edge and let it go, watching it drift. A small, fragile thing carried by a current stronger than itself. I stood the sapphire pendant warm against my skin and felt the weight of years lift. I wasn't the woman who'd stood outside the Silverstone Grand, humiliated and erased. I was Marilyn Stewart, a woman who'd written her own ending, not with anger, but with truth. The lake shimmered, the world quiet, and I walked home, my steps light, my heart full. The evening sky over Wilmington was a canvas of deep indigo, streaked with gold, where the sun had just slipped below the horizon. I stood on my back porch, the air cool and fragrant with the last of the summer honeysuckle. The sapphire pendant rested against my chest, no longer a weight, but a quiet spark, a reminder of the woman I'd become. The garden stretched before me, its tulip bulbs hidden beneath the earth waiting for spring, a promise I'd made to myself, one I intended to keep. The past weeks had been a quiet revolution. The chaos of the Silverstone Grand, the unraveling of Caitlin's carefully curated wedding, the whispers of the Redgraves' crumbling empire, they'd faded into the background like a storm that had passed. I hadn't spoken to Lionel since his letter, nor to Caitlin since I'd returned her check. Their apologies, raw and polished respectively, sat in a drawer not forgotten, but no longer central. My life wasn't theirs anymore. It was mine. I leaned against the porch railing, a mug of chamomile tea warming my hands. The cardinal feeder James had hung years ago swayed gently, its red visitors long gone for the night. I thought of Eloise, her charcoal sketch of me framed now hanging in the living room, a woman with sharp eyes and a blooming garden, a woman who refused to be erased. She'd called this morning, her voice bright with news of an art show, an invitation for me to visit her at college. "You're my inspiration, Grandma," she'd said, and I'd felt the words settle deep, a gift I hadn't expected but cherished. The mystery of the wedding had unraveled its threads, pulled loose by Helen's calls and Chloe's final note. Caitlin's purge of the guest list wasn't just personal, it was strategic, a move to prop up her father's failing business to paint a picture of wealth and control. I'd been a liability, a reminder of Lionel's roots, a truth that didn't fit their narrative. But in pulling the plug, I'd exposed more than their lies. I'd exposed my own strength, a fire I'd let dim for too long. The pressed lily from Chloe, now tucked into my journal, was a relic of that night, not of pain, but of power. I set the mug down and walked to the edge of the porch, my bare feet brushing the worn wood. The stars were emerging faint but steady, like truths that wait to be seen. I thought of the women I'd met in my book club in my art class, in the quiet moments at the cafe with the yellow awning. Women who'd carried their own wounds, their own silences, their own triumphs. I wasn't alone in this. Listen is this. We all have moments when the world tries to make us small to write us out of our own stories. But we don't have to stay written out. I turned back inside the house, glowing softly under the lamplight. My journal lay open on the kitchen table, its pages filled with sketches and words not of anger or loss, but of life. The curve of a tulip, the taste of apple pie, the sound of Eloise's laugh. Each entry was a step, a reclaiming, a refusal to let anyone else hold the pen. I sat down, picking up the fountain pen James had given me years ago, its ink dark and smooth. I began to write not for Lionel, not for Caitlin, but for me and for anyone who'd ever stood outside a door they'd built only to be turned away. To you reading this, listening to this, carrying this story in your heart, you are not invisible. They may try to erase you, to cross your name off their lists, to laugh when you show up anyway. They may take your money, your time, your love, and give you silence in return. But you are not their silence. You are your own voice, your own story, your own ending. I stood in the dark and I chose to step into the light, not because they let me, but because I decided I belonged there. You belong too. Write your name in bold, and don't let anyone erase it. Don't let them tell you who you are. Pick up the pen plant, the bulbs paint the sky. The story is yours. Make it yours. I set the pen down, the words steady on the page, a message I wished I'd heard years ago. I thought of the women in my art class, their hands trembling as they painted their stories spilling out over coffee. I thought of Margaret, the librarian, who'd hugged me without question, her own name cut from the guest list, but her spirit unbroken. I thought of Eloise, her sketch, a testament to the woman I was becoming. And I thought of myself, Marilyn Stewart, who'd stood outside the Silverstone Grand and walked away not broken, but reborn. The phone buzzed a soft vibration against the table. A text from Eloise's grandma. "I'm putting your sketch in the art show." I titled it Unseen Fire. "Is that okay?" I smiled, my heart full. "Perfect." I typed back. "I love you." I stood carrying the journal to the porch, the night air cool against my skin. The stars were brighter now, a map of light against the dark. I closed my eyes, letting the breeze carry the scent of earth and honeysuckle, the sound of crickets, the quiet pulse of a world that kept turning. I wasn't the woman who'd sewn patches on Lionel's jeans, who'd balanced checkbooks to keep us afloat, who'd signed checks to fund a wedding that excluded her. I was more. I was enough. I opened my eyes, the journal still in my hands. This wasn't the end of my story, but it was an ending, a closing of a chapter I'd let others write for too long. I stepped back inside, placing the journal on the shelf beside Eloise's sketch, the pressed lily tucked between its pages. The house was mine. The garden was mine. The life I was building was mine. And no one could take that away. To anyone listening, to anyone who's ever felt erased, your story isn't over. Over. It's waiting for you to pick up the pen, to plant the seeds, to claim the light. You are not their guest list. You are the one who writes the ending. And I promise you, it's worth writing.